Today on the Hembury Books Podcast, we have Anna Kharzeeva, who is the author of the Soviet Diet Cookbook, exploring life, culture, and history, one recipe at a time. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast, Anna.
Thanks for inviting me, Jess.
Your cookbook sounds fascinating, and I love the cover as well. Could you tell us about it, please?
Well, my book is a bit strange in the sense that it's not really a cookbook. It's a book about a cookbook. There was this iconic Soviet cookbook called The Book of Tasty and Healthy Food, published in the 1930s. And it was designed to help the average Soviet housewife to master the ins and outs of preparing all the food. And it was a book that many housewives had, and it was one of the very few cookbooks available. So it was one that everyone knew. And my grandmother had a copy, and a very clever American editor had the idea of having a young, I was younger, much younger than, Muscovite cook her ways through this iconic Soviet cookbook and write about it sort of Julie and Julia style, sort of how it's held up over the years.
So were you approached for the project, or did you pitch the project?
No, I was approached for the project, and I realize now how fortunate that was, because I wasn't even a writer. I ran a cooking school, and the editor came and she would bring her kids to my cooking classes. And she just said to me, would you write a couple of stories for Russia Beyond the Headlines about, I can't remember what it was. I think it was pelmeni or vareniki, what you call pierogi, the dumplings.
Okay.
And pirashki, which are the stuffed pies. And I said to her, look, well, I can't write. Like, I've never really written anything before, but my grandma has the recipe, so I can write a little blurb and include the recipe. And she said, sure, just write whatever you feel like doing. And I did, and I ended up really enjoying it. And then she said to me, well, I actually have this idea for a project for a year to write about this iconic Soviet cookbook. Would you be interested? And I was in my mid-20s, so I was up for anything. I said, okay, sure.
Why would you turn an offer down like that? What fun.
I know. And now that I am a writer, I realize how hard it is to get a gig like that, to write every week for a year. And, it got extended, and I ended up doing it for 2 years because it was quite popular.
That's just amazing.
Very fortunate.
So, and they provided financial backing for your time?
Yeah, they paid per entry. It wasn't a lot. It was much less than I made doing cooking classes or teaching English, but still, it sort of covered some of my time.
It adds your sort of, surely your presence by being the author of the book could have generated more clients for your cooking school.
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of fit into, one fit into the other. So no, it all worked well. And mainly, I kind of got a taste for writing, and I don't know if I would have done it if it wasn't for Lara, who approached me. So
right, okay. And so did she have a publisher? Like, who was the publisher?
She worked at Russia Beyond the Headlines. So it was a weekly column, and that was her idea, that it would run as a weekly column. And when we were discussing it, I said, let's bring my grandmother on board, because it was one thing to just make the recipes from that cookbook and write about it, but I felt like I would run out of steam quite quickly, because how much can you really say? The kitchens are different, the ingredients are different, the tools are different, but after a while, there's not much else you can say. So I thought if I got my grandmother on board, she could share stories of her life in the Soviet Union. And then that could be quite a lot. And so my editor agreed, and, we sort of figured out how it would all go, that I would make breakfast one week, lunch the next, then dinner, and then a special project, which was a jam or preserves or something that's sort of a bit complicated. So it was fun. And I'd speak to my grandmother each week,
That's
ask her for her story. Yeah.
Were you and your grandma in the same city at the time that you were doing this?
We were when I started. I was living in Moscow, and then I actually moved to Georgia while still working on this. So the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 months, I was writing it from Georgia, and I would call her. She also came to visit me, so for a little bit of the time, we were both in Georgia, in Tbilisi. And for the rest of it, I'd call her. And I also included other people's stories as well. So when I was writing from Georgia, I made some Georgian recipes, which there were plenty of in the Soviet cookbook because it had recipes from the different republics.
Yeah. Can you tell us about some of the recipes? I'd love to hear like the ingredients. What was a really popular one?
So the book has over 1,000 recipes. It's really extensive. And it's kind of not what you would expect from a Soviet cookbook, not what I expected from a Soviet cookbook, as in there were a lot of recipes that were quite sort of exotic, that called for crab meat or for like, I don't know, fresh figs and things like that, and the combinations. And it's because it was a propaganda piece as much as a cookbook. And so the idea was to show the average person, look how well we live, even though they knew very well that people didn't live like that. So some people, I've read in some memoirs that people use this book to kind of pass time, to just look at it as though it was some fairy tale. It was
Really?
like a magical book, that provided a gateway into some sort of a magical life, but it was supposed to showcase how good Soviet life was. So
Wow.
some of the recipes were quite surprising, while others were more sort of traditional and what you would expect, like the pies or the dumplings, the porridge, different types of soup, all of that.
And how has Russian cuisine kind of evolved over the years? Like, how did the recipes compare to what you were teaching people to make in your cooking school?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Russian cuisine changed a lot. There was the pre-revolution Russian cuisine, which consisted of different parts. There were parts for the city. There were like what people ate in the city, what the nobility ate. So the salads, that's where salads came from. They never existed for people who lived in the villages, and then people who lived in the village ate, a lot of rye, fished, foraged fruits, and berries, and they preserved a lot for the winter. So they were sort of two different cuisines. And then in the Soviet Union, they tried to create a new cuisine because they were trying to create a new person. And so they kind of created some new recipes. Mikoyan, who was the minister of food to begin with, traveled to the US to find the best way to feed the proletariat, which is where he brought rissoles from. He wanted to make hamburgers, but then the war started. He didn't get to it. And he brought all the canned goods. So in the Soviet Union, there's lots of canned products. And then the Soviet Union also, because there were so many different republics and each had its own cuisine, they tried to kind of create this melting pot of these cuisines. So the Book of Tasty and Healthy Foods had recipes from Georgia, from Armenia, from Azerbaijan, from Uzbekistan, from Lithuania, Estonia. So it had different recipes in it. So it was kind of a weird mix. You could find anything you wanted pretty much in those recipes, but you couldn't, for the most part, find the ingredients to make them.
Okay. Could you share one of your favorite stories about your granny?
Yeah, there are many. I sort of thought of one that my mom shared after Granny died, which is that she was a school teacher, a math teacher for a long, long time. And she had one student who she kept failing at math. He was horrible, apparently. Just, I don't know if he wasn't trying, if he wasn't getting it, or I don't know. I'm sure that she helped him in every way that she could, but eventually she failed him. And I think he had to drop out of school because of that. And he went into a different school. And, kind of sounds rough, poor guy. But then years later, she bumped into him at a bus stop, and she came up to him and said, how are you? And he said, the fact that you didn't pass me was actually the best thing, because I ended up going to a school that suited me much better, and I got to develop sort of my talents, which had nothing to do with maths, obviously, but it was a good thing for him in the end. And I love how she had the courage to come up to him at the bus stop and didn't pretend like she didn't see him, because she would have thought that he hated her.
Yeah.
And B, that she did the right thing in the sense that he obviously wasn't passing, and she wasn't going to pretend like he was. And whilst it seemed bad in the moment, it actually worked out to be good. And it's kind of a good thing to remember, I think, that sometimes we think we're doing the right thing by helping someone, but it's not the right thing. Sometimes, it works out in a way that we can't predict.
Yeah. She had integrity as a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
She loved it. She loved teaching. So I'm sure she didn't do it to be mean. She just...
No, if maths is kind of black and white, isn't it? If the wrong answer is the wrong answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Did she love cooking? Do you have fond memories of her cooking?
Oh yeah, she loved cooking. She was one of those sort of traditional Russian babushki who show their love through cooking. She always cooked. I think she really enjoyed the process. She loved things that would take a while. She loved fermenting, and she loved making, soups that she had to cut up 1,000 different veggies for. And she enjoyed that process of being in the kitchen, working with her hands. And she also loved introducing new ingredients and new flavor combinations. I remember when I first brought some ginger to her, I was in my early 20s, and I'd never seen ginger before. And she loved it. She started adding it to everything, sweet, savory dishes. And then she learned about curry. So she was adding curry powder into everything. And, she was really adventurous. And so whilst she had some of her favorites that she made all the time, she was also keen to experiment. And she definitely derived a lot of joy from being in the kitchen.
And you inherited your love of cooking from her, and perhaps your mum as well. Was your mum also a keen cook?
No, my mom doesn't like cooking very much. It's yeah, it's kind of funny. When I was growing up, I didn't cook with my grandmother. So many food writers will say, I grew up with my mom and my grandma in the kitchen, and I always had my hands in dough, and I was always there smelling everything. That was not my story at all. I didn't grow up cooking. My mom didn't cook. My grandmother cooked, but she would bring it over to us, or we'd come over to her, and I'd see a little bit of her cooking, but her kitchen was tiny. So you couldn't really be there a lot while she was cooking. And I got into cooking when I was in my mid-20s.
Oh.
I first sort of started cooking. And it's kind of odd, but I thought of doing this cooking school. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to hire somebody else to teach the cooking because I can't do it myself. And then I guess I better learn to cook also. And so I started learning while running a cooking school. And now I got to the point where I really love it. Now it's been, some 12, 13 years. And now I really love it. And I am like my grandmother now, in the sense that I will choose to spend a few hours in the kitchen to make something, that that I didn't have to make, I didn't have to spend hours in the kitchen. So it's kind of funny. Now I am in that space, but it actually took a while, and it took a conscious effort to get here.
So you were running a cooking school in Moscow, and your book came out in 2020. Tell us about sort of the publication of the book and how it was received. And was it in Russian first before English?
No, it was always in English. So this that Moscow, sort of Russia Beyond the Headlines publication, where I was publishing every week for 2 years. Once we finished that project, and we finished it because my grandmother said, I've had enough, don't have any more stories for you. It's a lot every week, trying to reminisce about something, trying to come up with something interesting. so once we finished, my editor said to me, I love these stories so much. Let's turn them into a book. It would be a shame otherwise to not have them all sort of collated and published in one place. And I said, okay, sure, why not? Let's do it. And we started looking for publishers, couldn't find anyone. Took a while. Like for a while, I was emailing different publishers. I had no idea how it all worked.
Yeah.
Had no idea how the publishing world worked. I knew virtually nothing about it. But I thought, oh, it's such a brilliant idea. Of course, they're all going to love it. Of course, none of them loved it. Well, a few of them wrote back and said, no, we do actually really like it, but it's too niche for us. So I had like a few publishers write back and be nice about it, which was lovely. And some even recommended, you should try this publishing house, you should try that. And none of it worked. And in the end, Lara, the editor, Lara McCoy, she said, well, I heard that Amazon has this self-publishing service where they will print on demand. And we decided to do that. And you kind of, I can't remember how it works exactly, but you upload your file and then they have it and then they print it. And I had a friend order it in the US because she lived in the US to see how it would turn out. And honestly, I didn't really like the way it was printed, the book. It turned out, it was quite expensive to order for the people. And then it was paperback, but inside I didn't like the way the pages looked. And I was like, no, I don't like that. I don't want to have that. So I left Amazon just as an ebook.
Oh.
And I found a self-publishing service in Russia, which then printed the
interesting
hardcover.
Can you show the cover? It's just beautiful.
Thank you.
Who designed the cover?
So again, I was very fortunate. This is a story of how I was basically really lucky. My friend in Moscow, I've known for years, is a professional book cover designer and lettering artist, because you'll see the letters here are really nice.
Beautiful.
So she wrote that, and she, gave me a good discount and worked on it. And she designs covers for some of Russia's best publishers. So
what's her name?
Really good. Her name?
Yeah.
Her name is Olga. No, I think in English she calls herself Ola. Gosh, I can't remember her last name now.
In case anyone is looking for her skills, they could get in touch. Well, maybe they could get in touch with you and you could pass them on.
Yeah. So it's Ola Pankova. I'll have to find it on Insta, exactly what her Insta is called. She's quite busy, but yeah, she's very good.
Yeah.
And so she was working on some layouts, and she sent me a few ideas of what she was working on. And I liked one. And she said to me, ideally, I would have a real plate to work off. Mm-hmm. So I looked online and I found this plate. It's kind of like a bowl.
Yeah.
And this had something else. This said 1956 or something.
Okay.
And I bought it off somebody on sort of like a Gumtree website, the Russian version of it, and had it sent to her. And I think it was during COVID already. And I had it sent to her, and then she worked off that real plate, and I still have it in Moscow. So it's kind of a nice thing to have a real plate that is on the cover, but it's also in my cupboard.
It's just beautiful. It's so striking, and it's sort of perfectly.
Thank you.
Yeah. What's the self-publishing industry like in Russia? Is it flourishing?
Yeah. I don't know how it's changed after the war, of course, but yeah, it was working really well. Like this service, they can design it for you. They can do the layout for you, and they have, different packages where, one that's sort of more or less automatic, one where a designer actually works on it. And then, you can choose paperback or hardcover. And then they also place it in the shops, online stores. And so you kind of don't have to do too much to get it done. And it's price-wise, it's also reasonable. So, and there are a few services like that. I chose one, I think I was recommended. I can't remember now. And they did a great job. It was all good. And the book arrived. I ordered it thinking it would arrive sort of in early September, maybe late August. And then I was wondering sort of where it gotten to because it was running a bit late. And in the end, it arrived on the day of my grandmother's birthday. And it was her first birthday. Well, it was after she died. It was the first birthday without her. And we all got together, my mom and my son. We were having lunch sort of for her birthday. And then there was a knock on the door and the books arrived. No, that was supposed to arrive weeks earlier. And of course, the book is all about her. So it was like, wow, this is incredible. Just at that moment when we were all together, sitting down to have lunch. So,
wow.
That's quite special.
Yeah, that gave me shivers. That's amazing. It was like a message from her or something. And it must be, as she's passed away, to have had that time with her and to have captured her stories must be good.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad I did it. And I sort of spend a lot of my time on social media trying to convince others to do the same because, whilst your grandparents or parents are still alive, there's a wealth of stories and so many recipes that if you don't capture them, they're going to be gone. And my son, when he's older, will be able to read this book and get to know his great grandmother in a sort of an intimate way. He knew her. He was 3 when she died, but how much is he going to remember from that? I don't know. But when he reads the book, it will be a lot about her and about me as well. Yeah. So it's sort of a nice family heirloom.
And the period that she was describing, was that because the book, the original book came out in the 1930s, did you say? Was she sort of 1940s, 1950s cooking?
Yeah, she was born in 1932.
Right.
And the book was her wedding present. She would have got married in 1960, maybe.
Okay.
She was a little bit older, sort of, for that time to get married and have a kid. She was 30 when she had my mom, which back then was old.
1960s Russia, like politically, what was happening then, the period that she was describing?
So Stalin died in 1952. And she grew up under Stalin.
Wow.
And then there was Khrushchev, and Brezhnev is from 62, 63, I think. I should know this better. But basically, not a lot of ingredients. She always had to queue for a long time.
Yeah, lots of
substitutions. And no, they always managed. Food was always delicious, from from my memories. Yeah, I'm sure it was always good, but
and not wasted. So there'd be, like rice pudding, that the recipe for that came about so that you don't waste leftover rice. I bet she had amazing kind of tips like that so that there's no waste.
Oh yeah, no, she definitely didn't waste anything.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So so your book does it have recipes in it? Is it more?
Yeah, so it has. So the way it worked was I took a recipe from a cookbook and I went to my grandmother and I'd say to her, okay, so look, the book is saying that you need to buy, I don't know, crab meat and make the salad. And then I'd ask her, what's your take on buying crab meat in the Soviet Union? And she would tell me her story. And she was very anti-Soviet government, very anti-regime. And then I'd write it down. So I'd write the piece, and then I would include the recipe from the cookbook in the end. And sometimes it was a few recipes. So, for example, like here.
Sorry, yeah.
No, that's right. There's mushroom bouillon, bean spread. Actually, the bean spread was delicious. chicken with white sauce and lemon jelly. So I've got all these recipes that I translated from the Book of Tasty and Healthy Food. And fortunately, there's no copyright for the cookbook because it was published by the state.
Mm.
And sometimes I would make a recipe and it would flop. And in that case, I would add a recipe from my grandmother so that there would be a decent recipe to work off. And the thing was that I followed the recipes and I did exactly what they said, even when I thought it sounded a bit off or a bit weird. I wouldn't change it because I saw it as an experiment, because it wasn't to test my cooking skills so much. It was to see how the cookbook worked. And I wasn't an amazing cook at the time. I was an average cook. So if I was able to follow the recipe, what would happen? Because if I started changing the recipe and making it better, because my grandmother would tell me sometimes, no, don't do what the book told you. It's not going to work. I'm going to tell you what to do. And I'd be like, no, I can't. I have to follow the recipe, because if I make it with your changes, then it's going to be your recipe. It's not going to be the Soviet recipe. And so sometimes things really didn't work. And in that case, there's a different recipe added.
Right.
Or for example, for plov, which is, like a Uzbek rice dish with meat.
Yeah.
The recipe that the cookbook has, is very vaguely reminiscent of real plov, because they kind of Russified all these Uzbek, Georgian recipes, because they're completely different cuisines. And the Russian palate is not so good with spicy flavors or with too much flavor. And so they changed it. And in that case, I added my Uzbek friend's recipe for plov, which is authentic.
Yeah. How, in terms of the recipes that you've included, the formatting of those in terms of self-publishing, like what program did you use, or did you give it all to the company in Moscow to handle?
So it's kind of low on formatting, because it's not a proper cookbook.
Yeah, okay.
It's just just looking to show you. It's just words. So the recipe will say just recipe, and then it will say the ingredients and the method. That's all.
Okay.
Pretty simple. And the way they wrote recipes back in the day as well, it wasn't very detailed, and it was literally take 4 potatoes, cook, boil till cooked, or bake in the oven till ready. That's the degree of detail. Yeah. So
people were expected to have a bit of common sense, weren't they?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think people were I think the women, and of course it was for the women, I don't think the women were expected to be alone in the kitchen with it. They were supposed to be in the kitchen with their mom, their grandmother, their aunt, or their kommunalka, which is a shared apartment, communal apartment, with a kommunalka neighbor, who would tell them what to do. It's not like modern cookbooks that give you a lot of detail, that provide a lot of context. And
I always find it funny sometimes, you get like a bottle of water like this and it says like undo the wrapping and then take a drink. And you're like, okay, I think I've got it. So did you have the idea, just in terms of self-publishing a cookbook, did you think, okay, maybe we could use photographs or something, but it was too tricky to do that, and that's why you kind of kept it simple? Or is that what the company said they could do for you?
So, yeah, it's kind of tricky with photographs because, of course, you want to have photos, but then to have them properly, like to have the book designed with photos was going to be quite expensive. And not just on my end, for the buyer, the cost of each book was going to be too high. So what they suggested, I think it was the self-publishing platform suggested having sort of like inserts with photos. So it's mostly black and white without photos, but then there are pages that have photos.
That's wonderful. That's come out really well.
Thanks. Yeah, so there's pictures of Granny and me and some of the food. This is from the Soviet Cookbook, because the style of that the Book of Tasty and Healthy Food was quite unique. It's sort of this Soviet chic, and it's actually gorgeous. So I wanted to show some of it as well. So yeah,
that's
so there are
wonderful.
some. So I was taking photos as I was cooking. Again, I had no idea how to take photos, and they taught me. Russia Beyond the Headlines very gently taught me how to do it better than what I was doing, because I was doing a horrible job.
Right.
And then I also have a friend who's a photographer, and she took some photos for me as well. So
okay.
Look, ideally I'd have more. Ideally it would be done with lots of photos. It would be like this beautiful book, the way that these modern cookbooks are published.
Yeah. Like a coffee table book.
Yeah. But it's hard to do in self-publishing like that. I don't know.
It is getting better all the time. I know Ingram Spark, the kind of diversity of choices to make a really premium book, but it is, you have to calculate the cost for the buyer and color photos. Just having color photos, like, because in my books they're black and white, because you're sort of adding on an extra $10 to the retail price. So
yeah,
you have to weigh it up. But your book was really popular, wasn't it? Tell us about how it was received.
Yeah, it was, because it was sort of, the market was a lot of expats who lived in Russia, people who traveled to Russia, Russians who travel abroad and have friends overseas. And there wasn't a lot for them that was new to buy and give as a gift, as a souvenir. And the stories were, quite interesting. My grandmother's stories were fascinating. So there was there were lots of people interested. And when I published the first batch, I sold it really quickly, and I ordered the second batch, and it arrived not too long before the war broke out. So it kind of messed up my plans of selling that. And it's most of it is still in my mom's apartment.
What was the print run that you had ordered?
So I think at first I published maybe 100, 150. And then the second time I ordered 200.
Yeah.
And yeah, most of it is still there.
Yeah, they're still there. And so, and what happened, because now you're in Sydney. Tell us about sort of what happened for you around that time.
Yeah, so on the 24th of February in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, as I'm sure you've all seen. And basically, after 2 weeks of that, we decided to leave Russia because it felt quite unsafe in the way that they were cracking down on everyone who disagreed and all of that. And I'd been to a protest, and I'd spoken to Australian media and posted on social media about it as well.
Yeah, really scary.
And and so we left, and we left really quickly.
And that's you and your Australian husband? Yourself and your Australian husband?
So me, my Australian husband, and our son, who at the time was 4. And so we left really quickly. We only had time to really pack a suitcase each. And I actually packed 3 copies of my book, thinking, okay, if we run out of money, I'll exchange it for food.
Anna, that's scary.
And I gave it to some people, actually. Like when we got to Australia, I gave it to a couple of people, which was nice. And then I caught up with my mom in India last year in October, and she brought a few copies to me as well.
Is your mom okay? Is she?
Yeah, she's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, as okay as anyone can be nowadays, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then tell me, sort of, it must have been difficult, if from a marketing point of view, where you have a book, about Russian cooking. What sort of happened?
Yeah, it is hard because, I was living in Moscow. I was relying a lot on the foreigners traveling to Moscow, and I was still doing, before COVID, I started doing cooking classes again that was sort of boutique historical cooking classes that I really enjoyed. But then COVID kind of scrapped those
Like,
plans.
yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to publish the book. And because I'm going to be hosting these cooking classes, my guests will be interested in buying the book. So it's kind of easy for me. I'm there, the books are there. It's an easy sort of additional
Yes.
sale for me, a bit more of an income from any event that I host. And of course, that didn't work because then as soon as COVID started to ease off, the war started. So that didn't work out. And then, of course, it was hard to be Russian full stop, let alone a Russian who's trying to sell anything about Russian culture. And especially because my book says Soviet on the cover.
Yeah.
And Soviet is not the flavor of the month or of the year. And it's a very anti-Soviet book, mine. I come from a long line of people who detested the government, and I am anti-Soviet in nature as well. But it's hard to put that message across when your book says the Soviet Diet Cookbook and has a sickle and hammer on it. So to be honest, I felt like it was kind of finished, the book. What was I going to do? What I did was I sold some electronic copies of it to raise money for Ukraine when I got to Australia, because I was fundraising for Ukraine once I got out of Russia, because in Russia, if you do that, you can go to jail for 20 years. So the way it still helped me, though, was it kind of added to my profile in the sense of, I did a lot of interviews when I left Russia, trying to highlight the experience of an anti-war Russian and what it means to be Russian in 2022, especially. And then some people became interested in my book also, and I did, ABC Conversations interview where I got to talk about my book as well, and not just about the experience of leaving Russia. So I feel like it kind of, I don't know, eased my entry into Australia in a sense. So it still helped me. It still helped me that I wrote the book and that I have it, even though selling it is actually, it's hard, because some people still message me and say they want to buy it, but to ship it from Moscow, like my mom has sent it to a few people from Moscow, but not all postal services now work with Russia, and it's kind of hard. And you can't ship anything from Russia to Australia, and vice versa.
Wow. You just can't.
Yeah, since the war, I think Australia's cut off postal services with Russia. So I brought a few books back from India, and when we caught up, and I've got like 4 left on my shelf that I'll just sort of, when I meet someone that I feel like I should give them a copy, I'll give them a copy, but kind of that's it. And I did look into publishing it here in Australia, thinking, okay, maybe I should have it printed here and have it sort of available through like Ingram. I'm pretty sure I even spoke to them, because I was lucky enough to have met Tim Minchin at an event, and he said that he'd heard about the book. And I was like, well, if he's heard about the book and he's interested in it, I should publish it here. But then
should, Anna, I can help you if you want. We can go offline and we can work out how to do this. What did Ingram Sparks say to you?
No, they said, I can't remember. They told me it would cost a couple of $1,000s, which isn't the end of the world. It's not an enormous amount. I just felt like, I don't know, I wrote this book so long ago, and my writing has changed, and I feel like it doesn't represent me as a writer today.
Do you know what? You need to update your book with the preface will be so important to locate the book in the current day and to very clearly explain all the things you've just said to me, and then spend some time making sure that it reflects your writing voice today. and re-release it and maybe add a couple of other things, and then you have a whole new reason to generate publicity. Set up a website, put it on Amazon. For sure, Amazon could do a good job. I could help you with that. And also Ingram Spark, and start selling it in Australia, because it adds it adds some nuance to state and to talk about some really important things that are happening. And you seem to be the perfect person to do that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's
yeah. You could because imported books are updated and re-released, and so much has happened that it really should, you should do that. I had something similar. We were talking about this on the phone when I wrote my book about Myanmar, and I was just finishing like the second last chapter, and then the military coup happened. It was like a double-edged sword, because I suddenly realized I've written a history book. I thought I was just writing this sort of lighthearted expat tale of a time, when Myanmar began to open up to democracy. And all of that has been wound back. But some people accuse me of trying to profit from the coup, as though I'd sort of, timed it to make it newsworthy, when of course I had no idea what.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Yeah.
And I donated $1 from every copy to the democracy protesters and oxygen tanks for COVID relief and stuff like that. Of course, it did generate a lot of media interest in it. We're talking about Myanmar, but tourists stopped going to Myanmar and they haven't returned. And I don't think really they'll ever return. So I kind of wanted the book to encourage more people to visit Myanmar, because it doesn't get tourists. But in terms of pivoting, so because these kind of external events happen to authors all the time. With you, it's really dramatic and tragic and awful. But often something happens where this book we've put years of work into, something happens. It could be someone releases the same kind of book as you 1 month before you do. Do you have any advice on like mindset and trying to pivot to think laterally about how can I make this book how can I still get the word out about my book?
I think, I don't know, I still see it as a big privilege to be able to write a book and to be able to publish it. And it's something that will always kind of stay with you no matter what happens, even if it's not a huge commercial success. And even in terms of just navigating life and new challenges, you always have that additional thing to your name, the book, and you can always leverage that. Even if you're not making money out of it directly, when you go for job interviews or you do whatever it is, you're meeting new people, it's this really nice extra thing, the word author has a nice ring to it. And well, then obviously, you're very clever and wise in what you said about you can always adjust it and write a new preface and make it contemporary in that sense. Because, in my circumstances, when I moved, my grandmother died 1 year later, exactly 1 year later, I left Moscow. And then sort of adjusting to life in Australia, and I was making a lot of her recipes. And making her food was a big part of sort of my longing for home, and also just trying to create a bit of comfort for me here, far away from where I come from. And it can be something that I can work into this book now.
And how the books arrived on her birthday.
Yes, that's true. That is only on my Insta now, this story.
No,
it should be.
What about starting? Are you doing cooking classes in Australia? Because you could do that again.
Not really. I was working as a program manager at a Jewish nonprofit, and I did some food events for them or through them. And I just finished up last week. So I might do some food events here every now and again. I wouldn't do it on a regular basis, but yeah.
Well, if you do update your book and publish it in Australia, you need to do some of these cooking events, because that's an amazing tie-in. Right? I would love to come. I can't cook. I'm a terrible cook, but I would love to come and learn.
Ah, awesome.
Yeah.
No, I definitely should do it as well. And I mean, I have another book idea in mind, and I've been working on a pitch for months now. So I'll see if that works. And see if getting a publisher, because I would not want to self-publish again.
Why? Because it was stressful. You didn't get the results you wanted.
I guess because the first time I had the book already written when I started approaching publishers, and also I guess my need to make money now wasn't as high as it is now in immigration. When we came here, not Russia, but Western payment systems cut Russia off, and so our cards didn't work. We couldn't transfer any money here, and we had to get jobs and start working and start earning.
Yeah.
So I couldn't afford to work on a book without getting some kind of a deposit, without knowing that it will make some money. I just don't have that luxury anymore. So, and also I would love to work with an editor. I really enjoy getting feedback from editors saying, tell more about this, or what
you should. Every book needs an editor. Yeah, definitely. Well, this is where I plug Hembury Books, because Hembury Books helps non-fiction authors like yourself to self-publish their books. So you work with myself or a Hembury Books editor, and we do all the formatting for you, and your book just turns up on the day of your choice, and you have a really high quality book. So, I have someone who rode a bicycle through Africa. She wants a lot of photographs in her book, so she's going to have a lot of beautiful color photographs in her book.
Amazing.
So we custom make the book for you. And then the idea is as well is that, you earn more royalties. So you keep with the publisher, they may offer you an advance, but it's only like a couple of $1,000s anyway. This kind of flips the model. So you would have to invest in the services, but then you keep everything after that. So you keep about $8 for a paperback.
Yeah, no, that is good. That's what I had in Russia as well. I was actually making decent money when I was selling the book.
Yeah,
and that's why the model of the model of like doing a cooking class and selling, I don't know, 10, 15 books per class I was actually making a decent profit. I wasn't making like $1 from a book. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was decent, so that was nice, that each sale kind of, you could feel the money in your pocket. And
it's wonderful. Well, it has been fantastic to have you on the podcast, Anna.
It's been great speaking to you, Jess.
Yeah, and you must have been through an awful lot, and you're doing well to be in interviews and everything, and love to see you continue what you were doing here in Australia.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks so much. Yeah, it has been a rough ride, but Australia has been very kind to me, so I've been lucky again.
I mean, but just the experience that you have lived through would be fascinating as a memoir, and you could add more of a memoir component to your book, or you could write an entire memoir, because it's very contemporary. Sadly, it's so awful to see what's happening, and you could share your insights on that.
Yeah. That's sort of what my new pitch is about. So
wow, amazing. Well, I hope I wish you every success with that, because that would be amazing.
Thanks so much.
All right,
thank you.
Come back on the podcast and tell us about it.
I would love to. Thanks.